Of the many rabbit holes that I've climbed down here on YouTube over the last 10 years, DIY portable home consoles have to be by far the most interesting niche on the platform. Even though current mobile games can easily rival retro home consoles, I always felt that individuals who had the technical ability to create portable consoles out of N64s and PlayStations were getting a glimpse into the future much earlier than the rest of us. It's been almost 20 years since the PS2 first launched, and even with all of the advancements that have been made in both software and hardware, using an official device remains to be the best way to experience the system. So today, we're going to take a look at the best commercially available PS2 portable console on the market, the PS2P. This is obviously a different type of video than the ones that I typically make, but I do plan on covering a bunch of these systems all the way up to PlayStation 3, so if you want to be the first to see those, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is a pretty big review with a bunch of moving parts, but I will be covering the build quality, software and gaming performance, and a teardown before wrapping up with my overall thoughts of this device. Let's start off by covering the build of this unit. The PS2P is obviously using controls ripped from a PlayStation controller, so if you're familiar with how that feels, you will probably have an idea for how this thing will handle. Near the D-pad, we have a power indicator that changes between 3 different colors depending on the charge of the internal batteries. Below this, you will find the first of our stereo speakers, and the design of this is pretty interesting. They don't point directly at your face like you'd think, they are tilted at a 90-degree angle away from the center of this device. The joystick works exactly like a PS2 controller, so I won't really spend any more time talking about it in this video. The final button on this side of the device is our power button. This is actually the second power button that powers the PlayStation unit itself after you turn the entire thing on. I can't talk about the right side of the device without first talking about the crooked square key. This key might actually be possible to fix yourself, but it will require a complete teardown to be able to access the underside of this button. I don't personally think it's worth doing since it doesn't impact the performance of this console at all, so I wouldn't bother touching it. The right joystick and speaker are exact copies of the left side, so there isn't really anything else to mention here except that they do work, and I will be doing a sound test later on. That leaves us with our final 2 keys on the front of this device, and these are our first custom ones on the console. Both the start and select keys sit on top of a tactile switch that is a little loud, but it does get the job done. I had to go back and double check these measurements after filming, but this is a 16:9 panel with a diagonal measurement of 18 centimeters, a width of 15.7 centimeters, and a height of 8.8 centimeters. This is an IPS display, and while I don't think people will be viewing this from any other angle except dead on, this thing does have perfect viewing angles in every direction. There's a few things happening on the top of the device that I want to talk about. First, we have 2 sets of 3D printed keys on this, and I really wanted to hate these, but I have to say that they aren't that bad, even though they are a little rough. My only real issue with this is the fact that the L2 and R2 keys don't fully fill out the hole that they're in like the other 2 keys, so they can jostle around a little bit if you shake this device. The primary power switch is located on the left side of this near the power jack, and you will have to flip this before you can turn on the PlayStation itself with the other button that I showed you earlier. Near this is our first large airflow vent, and to the right of that is the USB port that we will use for loading ROMs. The final 4 buttons go directly to the LCD controller board. The S button changes your LCD input source, M is used for the menu, and the minus and plus keys are the volume keys on this device and the selection keys used inside the LCD menu. Now, I don't want to create the impression that this isn't a chunky device, because it is, but this is surprisingly not as thick as I thought it would be, considering that these DIY handhelds are usually thick with 2 Cs, but this thing is only 1.5 inches thick. You can really get an idea for the size of this thing if you compare it to one of the 3.5-inch handhelds on the market today, and if I use my 350H, you can see that it's completely eclipsed by the PS2P. The bottom of this is fairly straightforward with a ton of airflow vents that really do a good job of keeping this thing cool, even under full load. Unsurprisingly enough, even the back of this device is trying to mirror the Vita aesthetic, which I do find a little silly. I will say that the mold used in this does feel very robust and that it could take a beating, which is important since this is a very valuable device. I want to wrap up this section by talking about the overall weight and size of this device since it is fairly large. If I stretch out my hand, you can see that I don't even come close to covering the face of this. The exact length is just over 10 inches, which has to be close to the limit on how small you can make this, while also cutting down on the labor that's required to make the portable. I don't have a scale at home, but I do feel like this thing weighs between 1 and 2 pounds, which I find to be completely manageable even on the longer gaming sessions that went into making this video. I was also surprised that even in times when I went on a full battery drain, this thing managed to remain cool to the touch, and that's thanks to the airflow design, so don't expect this thing to get very hot. I do want to quickly talk about LCD options, since there are some important implications for gameplay. You can press the menu button to access the options for the screen. Here you can change brightness, contrast, and saturation, but the backlight doesn't do anything. You also have the ability to change the aspect ratio, which is a setting in most video game menus, but they don't always work well when set together. If you're someone that wants to experience these games in their 4:3 aspect ratio, you can turn that on and you will get black bars on the sides. You'll also want to turn on progressive scan in any game that supports it, as you'll get a higher picture quality out of this unit, but this is exactly the same thing as you'd get with a standard PlayStation. This is a review of a console and not the software that runs it, but I do need to talk about OPL since that's the only way you can play ROM backups on this device. OPL is a loader that has several features, but at its core, this will allow you to run ISO images of games from whatever USB you plug into the USB slot, as long as that USB is formatted in FAT32. This unit comes with a 32GB USB drive with around 7 games built in, but I am using a total of 3 for this video review since it's far easier to test some games in that way. Once the system is booted into OPL, it has the ability to recognize the ROMs on a new USB very quickly. You can see it populates all of the games that are on my 32GB stick, and you can easily select one to play by selecting it and hitting the circle key. There are a few things that make this process a little tricky, but for the most part, you only need a freshly formatted card, a utility app to split 4GB or larger files into chunks, and a defragging application to defrag your drive. The only issue that you'll ever see on this is that some FMVs are choppy since we are only using USB 1.1 for data transfer. This isn't a consistent problem, as I've played through a few FMV heavy games with no issues. A good example of this would be to show you the intro sequence in Kingdom Hearts 2. This is also a good time to show you an example of how long it takes to boot a game. And as you can see, the game is already booted. Now let's take a look at the intro FMV sequence in this game, which only suffers from a single stutter in the entire video. That being said, there are other games like Final Fantasy X that do suffer from some larger stutters. Before moving on to some gameplay, I want to quickly highlight the fan noise on this so you know how loud or quiet this device is. This is a mic'd up recording from the air vent. And this is a speaker test.
He had found a new family in the warriors of Sparta, gaining solace from his past, calling to battle.
At its core, this is a PlayStation 2, so you're going to have a vast library of games to play with this device. I tested a mix of popular titles for this video review, and I didn't have any compatibility issues. You can always check online if OPL has any reported issues for the games that you would want to play on this device before you decide to purchase it. The only annoying thing about running ROMs off a drive is that you will occasionally need to run a defragging application before your ROM will be able to play, but after you do, you'll be good to go. Now it's finally time for the teardown, and I'm going to start by removing the 2 back screws and the 4 screws on the top and the bottom. Then we can simply pry this open to get a look at how it was created. The first thing that you're going to notice are our 4 power cells that are under the palm rest, as well as the mounted fan that's blowing hot air directly out of the unit. To the left of this is the XFH DIY mod with a mounted USB port on the right side. The power switch is routed over the top half of the device with a combination of hot glue and solder. The set of wires near the fan and the fan itself are also both attached to the board with hot glue, as well as the 4 batteries. Now let's take a look at the top half. Right away, you can see that this is much cleaner than the bottom due to all of the standard connections that were used. There is one huge custom XFH PCB that routes all of the control functions of this device and the LCD back to the motherboard. Even with this cabling, there are still a few fly wires on this top half, but everything else is cabled in. Having seen a few of these devices, I would say that this thing looks pretty clean, even though it would be possible to make this better if you wanted to take more time. Someone left a comment on a post that I made saying that if this screen breaks, then you're out of luck, but if that happened, you'd easily be able to buy a new one and swap it into this unit. The screen is probably the easiest thing on this device to replace, since almost everything on it is cabled to the surrounding PCB. For what it's worth, this is the PCB from the PS2 that was cut down to make this, and it's a very impressive feat to be able to bring that size down to this tiny footprint. As for the entire unit, I would say that even someone with some basic soldering skills could service this design if they really needed to. This is actually a pretty clean build, and I honestly wasn't expecting it to look this good on the inside, especially since it's so easy to go hot glue crazy on these retail devices. I also like that this entire thing can kind of clamshell together without any issues. I do want to just say that I had a blast with this device, and I never expected that we'd be at the point where a group of people were mass producing these DIY retro portables. I easily sank 2 full days into testing this, and I loved every moment of it. This thing retails in China for just under $400, but it's readily available on AliExpress for around $570 with free shipping. There are websites that can export things from Taobao to other parts of the world, but I have no experience with using them since those things always seemed a little too sketchy for me. But that would be a valid way of getting this device for a little cheaper if you wanted to take the risk. Those agents typically take a percentage of the sale and charge shipping fees on top, which may end up saving you around $100 from the AliExpress listing at the end of the day. The important question is, would I buy this device? Or better yet, what type of person is this for? I think this device is really for the person that has a passionate connection to the vast PS2 library, and they've wanted to be able to take those games with them on the go for a long time. It's also important to note that even with the most expensive handheld device and the fastest mobile chipset, you will not be able to match the compatibility of this system, and that alone is enough of a reason for this to get a recommendation by me. If you've got the money and you don't mind splashing it on something like this, then you'll really have a blast. My name is Taki, and I've been your host on this review. If you like what you saw here and you want to support this and other DIY reviews, make sure you drop a like below and subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you here with another review. Now go out and enjoy the rest of your day. Taki out.